Hello, my darlings. Mother Raven here with a fabulous story for you. This one by ElenaRete, entitled A Haunted Fairyland in Trosa, Sweden. Y'all have a little obsession, right? Maybe it's with a video game or a show or a style of clothing. It might even be a person, or maybe more than one person. But what if these people don't exist? What if you take your obsession with them to a fatal level? That's what happened to my little sister, Lolita. My older brother, Erling, and I are too old to believe in fairies and magical princesses. He'll be off to college in a few months, while I'm just barely 15 years old. Lolita, however, is a completely different story. She's 11. So even she should be old enough to know that she is not a fairy princess. Notwithstanding, she still walks around in a puffy princess dress and fake fairy wings strapped to her back, saying she's a fairy princess. She even pretends to talk to fairies. Our parents aren't ready to tell her that they don't exist, nor will they let Erling and I break the truth to Lolita. I just don't understand why she's allowed to have such childish beliefs. Anyway, our parents woke up early one Sunday morning and left a note on the kitchen table saying that they'd be gone all day to run errands. Great, I grumpily muttered. Now Erling and I have to babysit Lolita. Let's hope she's in a quiet mood today. I opened the refrigerator to find there weren't many breakfast options other than leftover kanelbulle or Swedish cinnamon rolls. I put them in the microwave for a moment and a half, and when I turned around, I saw a small wooden box on the kitchen counter. I stared at it for a moment. That's rather strange, I thought. That wasn't there before. Curious to know what was inside of it, I slowly reached for the box. I tried to carry it with both hands, but it was rather heavy for something so small. Maybe there was something dense inside of it. I opened it only to be in utter shock by what I saw. It was a small, bloodied person wearing a ripped-up Victorian-style dress and black boots. She had long, straw-like blonde hair, and she was so skinny that the pale skin on her looked eerily tight. Her eyes were closed, and she looked as though she'd been stabbed in multiple places. The strangest part about this was that she had fairy wings. I screamed out loud and stepped back. It was then that I accidentally tripped on a large nail sticking out of the old wooden floors. I fell to the ground and hit my head on the wall. Once again I screamed, but in pain rather than fear. I shook nervously as I heard quick footsteps speeding towards the kitchen. Next thing I knew, there was Erling, was peering at me from behind the counter, not even noticing the box. He ran over to me and crouched down. "What's wrong?" he frantically asked, putting his hand on my back. "I heard you screaming, and then I heard a loud noise. The box on the counter," I muttered. He stood up and looked at the box. He jumped up in surprise at whatever the thing was. "What the hell?" he asked, sweeping his long blonde bangs from his face. "Where did that come from?" "I don't know," I shouted. "It just appeared out of nowhere." He stared at me for a moment. Then he looked at the hallway with a distraught expression. "There can only be one explanation for this," he said, leaving the kitchen. He shouted, "Lolita, you've got some explaining to do." I stood up, trying to ignore the box. I wiped the dust off my clothes as the microwave started beeping. I sighed with relief. It was about time I got something in my stomach anyway. I was halfway through a canulabolo when Erling came back into the kitchen. His ice blue eyes were watering, and sweat was dripping all over his pale face. That and his expression made him look like he had just watched a gruesome horror movie. "Is everything all right?" I asked, taking a bite of canulabolo. "I can't find Lolita anywhere, Esther," he groaned. I stopped chewing and dropped the bread. As I swallowed, he gave me the most panic expression ever. "Please don't get mad at me," he whispered fearfully. "I won't, but we need to find her," I said, standing up. "Did you check her room?" "Yes, she wasn't there, but her window was open." I sighed. "Then she probably crawled outside looking for her make-believe fairies or whatever." "I wouldn't necessarily call them make-believe anymore," Erling responded. He gestured over to the box. I was still too scared to look at it again. I started. I wanted to say it was fake, but something about it made me think that it wasn't. Was it the details of the bony structure it had? Or was it how the blood smelled metallic, just like real blood did? Nevertheless, I began to walk down the hallway. Fine, let's just get this over with. Erling followed me to Lolita's room. I opened the door, only to see that everything was a mess. Her blankets and pillows were strewn all over the floor, and so were her Barbies. One of the pictures she had hung on her wall was even tilted. The open window was on the other side of the room. "Great, we have to go through this," I grumbled. "Yep," Erling sighed. "Come on, let's go." We tiptoed through the room, trying not to step on anything. What felt like an eternity later, we finally made it to the window and climbed out. The overgrown, vibrant green grass felt very strange against my bare feet, especially since it was covered in morning dew. But I ignored it. Erling and I ran to the front yard and then down the street. Trosa is a small town in Sweden. It's basically stone roads, rivers, fields, and buildings that look like they belong in the late 19th century. It's also not a very big town, with just over 5,000 people in it, so it's not uncommon for people to know at least 1 to 2/5 of the town. This we could use to our advantage. "Have any of you seen Lolita Bergstrom? She's our sister. She's gone missing," Erling and I repeatedly shouted. At first, people would either just shake their heads at us or stare for a moment and turn away. I was already beginning to lose hope. Mom and Dad were going to kill us when they got home. What if they saw us right now? Oh, I could only imagine their reaction when they found out that we hadn't even babysat Lolita for an hour and she already disappeared. But our luck quickly turned around when a thin woman approached us. She had thinning black hair and wrinkled skin, and she was almost as tall as Erling. "I might have seen her roaming around here a minute ago," the woman said, "but I can't quite say it was her. What does she look like?" "Well, she has dark brown hair," Erling said. "So do a lot of 11-year girls in this town," I teased. "Oh, would you stop it?" Erling laughed, and then turned serious again. "Anyway, she has green eyes and fair skin, and she's very petite." The woman stroked her chin with her finger and thumb. Erling and I anxiously stared at each other, waiting for the woman to answer. "If it helps, she was probably dressed up as a fairy," I added. "I guess I did see her," the woman called out. Then she pointed to the right. "I believe she's over to the beach." "Thank you very much," Erling and I said simultaneously. The woman nodded as we went our separate ways. Once we made it to the beach, we began running around calling Lolita's name. There were people everywhere. Families, couples, friends throwing parties. But no Lolita. The further we ran, the more afraid I got. "Do you think that woman screwed us over?" I asked Erling. "I would hope not," he answered. Just then we passed a couple of trees. I stopped and looked at them for a moment. Noticed there was a pair of feet in pink slippers with white tights sticking out of them. I knew immediately it was Lolita. "Hey, what are you staring at?" Erling called out, staring at me from a distance. "I found her," I responded. He ran over to me and I pointed at the shoes. Erling smiled. "That's definitely her," he said. We walked over to her. Once we were a good feet away from her, I could hear that she was crying. That couldn't have been good. When we approached her, we saw she was sitting down, crying hysterically. There was no sign of her being hurt, which was fortunate enough. Now we just needed to figure out what was making her so upset. Erling crouched down and put his arms around her. "Everything's all right, Lolita." "No, it's not," Lolita cried out. "What happened?" I asked. "They went away," Lolita whimpered, pointing to a horde of trees behind her. "Who are you talking about?" Erling inquired, letting go of Lolita and standing up. "The fairies," Lolita answered. She wiped her tears and continued. "I saw a bunch of fairies outside my window, so I climbed out and chased them around. But they were too fast. I couldn't keep up with them anymore. I just wanted them to be my friends." Erling and I stared at each other with guilty expressions. Lolita had been right all this time, yet the two of us had been laughing behind her back for so long. Geez, we're the best siblings ever. But our chance for making it up came when Lolita asked, "Esther, Erling, will you help me look for them?" We nodded. Lolita smiled wildly and hopped up. We followed her into the forest. Around us were little specks of light floating around like fireflies. For a while we thought we could see small animals like squirrels running around. The more we walked, the more scarce the fauna of the woodland became. Instead, tiny little wooden houses with thick glass windows began to appear on the trees, one by one. "I think we found the neighborhood," I added. "You don't say," Erling retorted. I lightly punched his shoulder. Suddenly, something fell from one of the trees, landed with a relatively quiet noise. We took a closer look, only to see it was an oversized swallow. Its eyes were closed, its beak was open, and it had a gaping hole in its breast, with blood pouring out of it. "Oh, poor thing," Lolita whined. We took a few steps closer to it. Just then the bird opened its eyes, which were all white. Its head did an entire 160-degree turn. Lolita screamed and hid behind me. Erling and I just grazed at the bird as it began to fly up with its head still facing the other way. The bird screeched the most ear-piercing noise ever and flew into a nearby tree where it exploded into a bloody mess. I gagged as all the innards fell to the ground. "What the hell was that all about?" I screamed. "We may never know," Erling said fearfully. "Lolita, are you sure you want to do this?" Lolita nodded her head, but I could tell she was afraid. Her eyes were still watering as she was shaking, but alas, she walked forward, and we followed. Deeper into the forest, the little specks of light in the air grew bigger and brighter. Eventually, those weren't the only things that were flying around us. We began to see some of the fairies Lolita was talking about. They were all no more than 8 inches tall, and they all wore Elizabethan or Victorian-style dresses, just like the one I saw in the box earlier. They had long flowing hair, thin structures, and pretty faces. No two fairies had identical pairs of wings. They all either looked like they belonged to various birds, butterflies, or different kinds of bugs. The sight was so fascinating and surreal, I still couldn't believe I had ridiculed Lolita. "Lolita, where did she go?" "Erling!" I shouted, panicking. He jolted up from what seemed to him daydreaming and stared at me with great concern. "What?" he screeched, and then looked around. He frowned. "Shit, we lost her again," he growled. "She can't have gotten too far this time, so there's that," I sighed. Out of nowhere, I heard a blood-curdling scream that sounded far away, but it was still clear as day. My heart sank, at first thinking it was Lolita, but then I took a moment to process the sound of the voice. That didn't sound like my little sister. The voice sounded like a grown woman. "I'm just wondering if we should go find Lolita or help that person," Erling mumbled. "Like, what would be more—" "Let's just go," I hollered, running forward. I didn't care how far behind Erling may or may not have been. I just wanted to get out of that creepy forest already. But I had to find Lolita, even if I saw the dead corpse of whoever was screaming. Making sure that everyone was safe and getting home before our parents did was worth being scared for life. I had already seen some disturbing things today. Anyway, what was one more? I skidded across the sandy and bark-covered ground, almost tripping over myself. I stopped myself with one foot in the air and one hand gripping onto a large twig. After taking a second to regroup, I stood up dazed. After taking a deep breath and looking at my surroundings in a complete daze, I stopped, only to see a rather frightening thing in front of me. A young woman, most likely the one who screamed, was lying on the ground. Her ice-blue dress, made of silk, was covered in blood, and so was her fair-skinned face. She had bite marks all over her skin. Her eyes, which looked like it was dyed white, was extremely withered and dirty, and her blue eyes were bloodshot and watery. "What happened to you?" I asked. She slowly sat up, shaking and struggling. I offered to help. As she shook her head, she pointed behind me. I turned around, and to my horror, I saw Lolita clenching her fists, which were covered in blood. She also had blood all over her mouth. "Lolita, what did you do to this lady?" "She didn't think these fairies were real," Lolita growled in a deep voice. "She doesn't believe in the power of fairies." I tried to find something to say, but I couldn't seem to find any clever words. "Esther, my dear sister, did you really think I left just to play with the fairies?" Lolita continued. My eyes felt strained. So did my cheeks. I could feel my head and my heart pounding simultaneously. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. Had Lolita secretly been doing murderous shit behind everyone's back? "I've known Lotta here for quite a while now." Lolita spoke angrily, still in the deep voice that was continuously getting scarier. "Lotta once told me that fairies don't exist, that they were just some made-up entities in children's stories. Well, even when I tried to prove her wrong by leading her into the forest, she thought it was all fake. I couldn't take it anymore, so now I have to kill her." "No, please don't do it," Lotta screamed at the top of her lungs. "This is your consequence, you filthy non-believer." Lolita laughed satanically. "I'm sure you'll make a nice meal for all the fairies." "Stop this nonsense already," I snapped. "I'll call Mom and Dad and they'll be mad at you." "You really think that scares me into stopping?" Lolita chuckled. "Now get out of my way, Esther. Don't make me sacrifice you to the fairies as well." "Please help me, Esther," Lotta whispered. Impulsively, I took Lotta by the hand and ran away from Lolita. Lotta was crying hysterically. "It will be okay, Miss Lotta," I tried to coax her. "You get out of here and take you to the nearest hospital." "Thank you very much," Lotta murmured, smiling faintly. "You're a very nice person." "Don't think you can get away from me," I heard Lolita yelling. "Leave us the hell alone, you psycho," Lotta hollered, trying to run faster. But my legs were getting tired, my lungs were in pain, and I was taking short, quick, and fearful breaths. How long would I have to run before Lolita would leave us alone? I felt a heavy weight on top of my back, and it was so forceful that I fell to the ground. Before I could get up, I felt two hands grab me by the neck. Lolita. She was strangling me as if her life depended on it. I gasped for air, trying to crawl away from her, but she was sitting on top of me, and it was almost impossible to move. "Stop it, please," Lotta begged distraughtly. Lolita didn't respond. I managed to whisper, "You, Lolita, if I manage to make it out of here alive, I'm disowning you as my sister. You can seriously go yourself." Lolita chuckled loudly. "Well, I know you won't survive, so I don't need to worry about that." I shut it, and still sputtering and struggling for air before the world went black, I managed to give Lolita the finger. I woke up in my bed. I inhaled deeply and looked around the room. Erling was sitting in the beanbag next to my bed. "Good, you're awake." He sighed with relief. He'd been sleeping for a couple of hours. "What the freak?" I croaked. "What the actual freak just happened? Had I been dreaming all that shit?" "No, it was all real, fortunately," Erling uttered. "But everything is all right. You suffered no major injuries. I saw everything that happened with you, Lolita, and that lady. I called the cops and then our parents. Lolita's been sent to a mental facility." I looked down at my lap. My sister was a freaking maniac. There's no other way to put it. I just can't believe she would strangle her own sister and try to eat someone. Multiple thoughts were running through my head regarding the situation. How did our parents react to this? Will I ever see Lolita again? Will she get the help she needs? Did Lotta end up surviving? Erling held my hand, as if reading my mind. Lotta is fine, and our parents are okay. They're just glad we made it out alive. That's good, I guess, I mumbled, not sure what else to say. Also, Erling added, all those fairies we saw were fake. They were mechanical dolls that can fly up to 50 feet in the air when you press a button on them. I blushed, feeling embarrassed for thinking that they were real. So I was right then. Fairies are really non-existent after all. "Ah," I said, "but what about the bloody one in the box?" "I have no idea what that was about," Erling said. "But it's gone now." I threw it into the fireplace. "I'm happy we're all going to be okay, though. Mom and Dad made your favorite lunch, American food. Why don't you get some more rest and then come downstairs to eat?" "Sure thing," I answered. Erling nodded and left my room. Now that I wasn't dead, I couldn't disown Lolita as a sister like I said I would. But something was still off. What drove her to be like this? What made her love fairies to such an extent she would kill anyone who didn't believe in them? I guess I'll have to figure that out for myself. So quoth this raven.